of the Odysseys in Technology series that are sponsored by Sun Labs, and I'd like us all now to give a round of applause to Sun Labs for sponsoring this entire series. And I'd like to bring up Glenn Edens, who's Director of Sun Labs and Vice President of Sun.
So this is our second year of supporting the Odysseys in Technology series, and it's a real honor tonight to get to introduce tonight's speakers. As a matter of fact, I work for a couple of them, so the cost of failure is quite high. So I figured the best thing to do was be brief. And that coupled with the fact that this audience really, or this set of folks don't really need an introduction, I'll start with Andy Bechtolsheim, who we're lucky enough to have back at Sun. Sun is lucky to have Andy as our Chief Architecture and Senior VP of our Network Systems Group. Bill Joy was Chief Scientist at Sun till 2003, and he's currently a partner at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers. Vinod Khosla is been with Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers since 1986, really the premier venture capital firm. And of course, Scott McNealy, our CEO, who has a great quote that I just wanted to kick the evening off with, which is, without choice, there is no competition. Without competition, there is no innovation. And without innovation, you are left with fill in the blanks. So I'd like to introduce John Gage, who's going to be moderating our panel tonight, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. Well, for those of you that we are a little in sequence, well, let's do it. The bookends are technology and ex-roommates, and the center two are business and also ex-roommates. So Andy, Vinod, Scott, and Bill.
And John is really, he's like the fifth Beatle. You never knew.
Yeah, when you see those pictures, I was the one holding the camera. That's always good. I thought I'd start out at the very end of the story, in a way, because now two of you are venture capitalists, and all of you pay a great deal of attention to where money goes to support innovation, where we're creating the new technology companies that might have that same meteoric path as Sun. Would you invest in Sun today if someone walked up to you with a one-page or three-page business plan?
I go through this all day long. Do I need to?
Would you invest in Sun today? And who did you have offering the business plan? Well, you had a Stanford grad student. You had the controller or auditor for Daisy CAD systems. You had the production manager for Onyx that made a little knockoff Unix box of some sort. And you had a grad student at Berkeley, and they had a three-page business plan. Could you fund people like this?
But you mean today, 2006? Or
today, 2006. Yes, today, 2006. A little uneasy shifting.
No. I'll start with that. I don't know if I'd meet Bill's standards, since Bill's the venture capitalist now. But the fact is, the best plans are 3 or 4 pages long. In fact, the plan is classic it's part of a Harvard Business School case, and I still think of it as one of the best plans because Andy made sure every spare word was removed from that plan. It was a totally minimal plan.
Well, we had about a weekend to write the plan.
Yeah. So the best ideas can be put down very succinctly, and there's no reason a good business plan needs to be more than 3 or 4 pages if it's all neat and no fluff.
But I think, John, the problem here is you cannot separate the historical context from the investment decision. So you really have to go back to 1982.
Context.
But you have to ask whether it was a good decision to invest in 1982. And the answer is, of course, it was a good decision.
Hindsight rewrites all history.
No, I was actually invested in the company. I took all my spare cash and put it into the Sun. And I still remember which of the venture people told me, isn't this a lot of risk? You could be losing all your money. I said, I don't see any risk here.
Well, you were also the first poster boy for Sun, the first economist.
John, let me give you another example. Only a few years ago, Andy, essentially in Kalia, recreated a very similar plan, different context, different set of technologies. Anybody I know would have invested in it in a minute if you saw the basic idea behind the plan. I don't think Andy would have had any trouble funding that plan today. And without going into a lot of detail, Bill and I just funded another similar effort, not comparative and not in the computer business, but very similar, sort of very short PowerPoint and the right people with the right, clear, concise ideas. Bill, would you agree?
Yeah, I think the first funding for Sun was done very quickly, right? Was it done in a parking lot, or where was it done?
Well, I have a memory of the second round, which the fifth founder, who's here in the audience, Vaughn Pratt, standing at a board at the tiny Sun office in Santa Clara with that New Zealand sheep jacket. Do you remember that? The nubbly wool one that Vaughn had? And Vaughn was describing in detail which direction the Sun technology would take everyone. And John Doerr and Kleiner Perkins were all there, and you guys were all nervously hoping that Vaughn would finish so that you could end up saying at the end of it, this is why you need to fund us. Do you remember that meeting? This was the meeting when Kleiner Perkins visited.
Say yes, Andy.
I don't remember that exact meeting. I remember another meeting where the venture people wanted to invest, sort of ask us what we could be doing. We just kept going on and on. There was just so many good ideas. And I then sort of noted that they're taking notes of what we were saying, so I was getting worried that they would construe this as a commitment that we're actually going to do all of these things. But at the end, they certainly did invest. So.
Actually, what they were doing is they were taking those ideas and funding other startups.
Well,
but John, there's a comment I want to make to Bill's little comment about funding in the parking lot. You know, one of the great stories is we sort of got a commitment from Bob Sackman to fund us with seed money on sort of a very short meeting. And then we went out and sat in the parking lot, and Scott says to me, I don't know if I really want to do it. So I had to take him to an upscale dinner at the McDonald's on Page Mill to convince him to stick with the plan. Do you remember that?
That's not how it went. You said, so when are you quitting your job? And I said, what are you talking about? I'm making $40,000 a year. I ain't quitting.
You were working for Doug Broyles at the time.
I was working for Onyx Systems, yeah.
And he put money in. When did you bring Doug Broyles?
Well, I brought Doug in. He had left Onyx, and he was doing venture at West Coast Venture, and I introduced him to him that afternoon. And he looked, in a half hour, he watched this bouncing ball demo on this screen that had it was not UL approved. There were sparks flying. There were wires connected to a multi-bus card cage with smoke coming out, and a keyboard not packaged connected with copper wire, and it ran Unix and just did a bouncing ball demo. And Doug looked at it and said, wow, that's cool. I'll invest. I'm like, so that night, Vinod took me to McDonald's and said, when are you quitting? I said, you got to be kidding, man. I got a job. I'm going to have kids someday. I can't quit. And he said, you can't back out on me now, quote, unquote. I said, you made me an offer. He says, you're a founder. I said, oh, okay. So I went in and quit the next day. And it was that quick. I just thought, what the heck?
But I think there's an important point here. You're never completely without doubt. You know, it's sort of, you always have concerns and doubts. And so those of you who are thinking about it, you got to just jump in and do it.
You have doubts? I didn't have any doubts.
Right. It was your hardware that was sparking.
Well, I've been working on stuff for 3 years before the company started. So,
well,
it was hard to make some of that stuff originally, Andy. There were a few timing problems.
There you are.
For those of you who are techies, the pins on the multi-bus connector had 16 amp current spikes.
What did you say to that, Andy?
I know if you remember that, Bill.
They were blue wire specials.
When you began, so now we had, before the company existed, the three of you had been talking. Stanford University had the Stanford University Network. Vaughn Pratt was your thesis advisor. You were discussing whether or not the companies that you at that moment were licensing the technology to that could make this perhaps you should form a company to do this. And at some point, the three of you made a trek to Berkeley to meet Bill. Could you describe what happened there?
So before we got to Bill, so I had a previous company that was in this licensing business because I thought of hardware like software, like, open source, just give it away and people pay a royalty. And it actually did okay. It made like $500,000 in a year, and I thought that's not bad for starters. But the problem was,
especially for a graduate student.
Exactly. All these companies licensing stuff didn't understand the market opportunity. I mean, they had the licensing technology and they didn't know what to do with it. And I got really worried about this because there was obviously a window to this opportunity. So Vinod called me up because he also wanted to license this thing, I guess, or he heard about the license operation. And then very quickly the conclusion was we just start the company. And then he called up Scott, and then we needed the software co-founder, and then we called up Bill.
Well, no, that didn't go. We said we need somebody for Unix. So I went to my Onyx Unix buddies, and we said, who's the best Unix person you know? We went through about 2 months of trying to find the world's best Unix gurus, and we interviewed everybody and kissed a lot of toads in this process. And finally, we got to a really, really smart guy who was an absolute, not the kind of person we wanted to have in the company. And he said, well, the guy, other than Ritchie and Thompson, the son of Unix, the god of Unix, is Bill Joy. And Andy goes, oh, yeah, I know Bill. I'm like,
Well, what I knew about Bill was he was trying to finish Berkeley the software distribution release.
Right, so he thought he was busy.
He was busy.
We called Bill up and we said, we want to come up and talk to you. He says, I'm not interested. I'm making a lot of money. He says, I get an offer. He said an offer a month at the time, and you were making a pretty big bag of money. And then we said, well, Andy...
$41,000.
$41,000. He was rich. So he said, Andy, I'll send Andy up. So we said, all right, we'll bring Andy up. He says, you don't need to come, just send Andy up. So we all piled in the car. We got in Vaughn's rattle trap. I don't remember what it was. It was unsafe at any speed, whatever it was. And we showed up, and they were parking. So Vinod and I walked into and you had to see Bill Joy. When he codes, his fingers don't move, and code is flying across. He's like one with the keyboard. And he looks up, and we shake hands, and we sit back down, and he goes right back to the keyboard, and he ignores it. I asked him 8 years later, I said, what? Vinod and I are sitting there, and you're just coding. Why didn't you, talk to us? He said, I was waiting for top management to show up. So eventually Andy walks in, and the two of them do this thing like this. They get their hands on the forehead. We go to lunch. Vinod and I just watch. We have ribs or something. And we went home, and that's how we got Bill as the fourth founder. Yeah.
Well, there was a problem because the two of you at that point, and you can see it downstairs in the poster, looked like you were about 16 years old. So when you would go talk to senior management about come work for us, you went to see Ed Zander once. What did he do? Throw you out immediately or listen to you for a while?
Immediately. It took us 6, 7, 8 years to finally hire him.
There's an interesting story and a lesson in the Ed Zander story, because I called him first the week he had quit at Data General and agreed to join Apollo, Sun's biggest competitor. And I tried to pitch him the Sun story. The world was so different. He said to me, the first thing I'm going to do when I get to Apollo is to remove all references to any standard in their literature, because they say it's a 68,000 processor, and he wasn't willing to even acknowledge that. So this sort of open system standards thing was sort of the most critiqued part of the Sun business plan in those days. Every venture capitalist I talked to said, but what's the proprietary advantage? There was a lot of critique of how you're going to build something proprietary. And I sort of remember Ed's first comment to me when I tried to explain to him our strategy.
So build proprietary meant make money somehow, was the synonym.
Well, open systems was certainly not the accepted wisdom at the time.
Well, when these guys showed up at Berkeley, I had a room with 6 VAX 750s. It looked like a computer center, but they were actually my machines, okay? And I don't think these
6
guys knew
personal
that.
computers.
And I'd heard stories about Andy, because when Andy was at Carnegie, the story was that he'd do these designs that just barely fit on the board, and if the chips didn't quite fit, he'd get a file, and he'd sort of file them to be slightly smaller, filing the packages down.
It's true.
So,
I had to build it.
what do you show somebody who likes, so I figured I took him in the machine room, and all the machines are blasting. I just walked up to one of the mini computers and just turned it off and just pulled one of the boards out and said, here, look at this, because it was a relatively new machine from DEC, which used very early gate array kind of technology. And so that was our way of bonding.
I'll say the one thing I learned from Bill very early on is that he could type much faster than anybody else because he didn't use the shift key to do upper caps. So he would, every email you ever get from Bill is low caps only. And he told me it would actually improve his typing speed by at least 20% to not have to hit the shift key. So if you want to type faster, and this is some unique trick that he had.
It's true.
Well, software bugs, but other than that.
So in these early days, step back a bit and give us an idea of the technical environment. Here's a tiny startup. It's down in Santa Clara. It's got, in theory, Unix will run on these machines, but in reality, balls will bounce, and that's about all you're going to see. At that time, at Xerox PARC, there was a lot of work on windowing systems, which had a mysticism associated with it and a lot of complicated talk. The 68,000 didn't have virtual memory, so most of the VAX applications that you wanted to have run.
That didn't prevent us from promising virtual memory to everybody.
Well, we'll get into the management style in the earlier days later. This is but just give us an instance then, and then contrast it to today in 2006, because I've listened to all of you talk about opportunities in biological, new technologies changing. And the statement for most of us was, in 1982 when Sun began, everything that we did had already been, well, it was presaged in Doug Engelbart's papers, it was presaged in all of the discussion of the internet, open standards, all of that, and we spent the next 20 years just implementing what the dream had been.
John, the most computers, personal computers, are about the capability of a cell phone today. They had networking, if they had it, which is about the bandwidth that you'd have from, a contemporary wireless network, and they had about the programming model and memory footprint. So if you look for something that's poised in about the same way, it was as arcane to program most computers. And we had a machine, the VAX 750 that I turned off had an 80 meg disk drive, had a couple of megabytes of memory, and was about a 1 MIP machine. And Andy's design from Stanford, once it had the 68010, which had a microcode change so it could do virtual memory, was the same thing, but it was 1/10 the price. So that was really a revolution in capability.
Yeah, but to put this in
context, and it had a
context,
bitmap display also. Right?
So when Sun started was before there was IBM PC, was before there was a Macintosh. So Sun started in 82, IBM PC came out in 84, right? And the target we had was very clear, which is we wanted to run the same kind of applications that people were previously running on a VAX machine on a much lower cost personal computer. And it just happened to be a Motorola chip that was the only good chip at the time. And later, of course, we ported over to the SPARC chip. But at the time, it was kind of a revolutionary, idea to give each engineer scientist their own machine so they could actually get their work done instead of having 30 people trying to share a 1 MIPS, VAX machine and getting 30 kilobaud or whatever it is, kilo instructions per person on the average.
Well, there was also the in Sun, the network, Stanford University Network. You presaged the entire design on the assumption a network.
Right. So of all things, Ethernet was actually a standard because Xerox PARC decided to give it away and make it an open thing. And Stanford was one of the beneficiaries of the early Xerox giveaway. So we had an Ethernet at Stanford when all this activity took place. And it was obvious that a standard interface that at the time was a yellow cable, but otherwise worked fine, was an obviously good idea to plug into, and you could exchange data and share data. So I think that the biggest missing part was actually the Berkeley UNIX that Bill was finishing at Berkeley.
Well, I also had Dave Boggs and I stayed up all night one time. He built an extra run of some Unibus Ethernet cards that we debugged enough of that I could connect those VAX 750s. Were connected with probably a very similar Ethernet design to what you had in the prototype Suns, because that was all contemporary before you really could buy decent networking. Like a network board that would have 2 packet buffers so you wouldn't lose one when 2 arrived close together. Something modern like that.
So the machine downstairs, that early sheet metal beauty that you can see downstairs at the bottom of as you came in, it was multi-bus. It had a processor board, a memory board, a graphics board. So we'd have
256K on a board about this big.
And then to make sure that these would function when they arrived at the customer site, that was your job, Scott. And you built, as I remember, a burn-in facility, highly sophisticated, with plastic sheets across a plywood box, and you'd put them in there and let them run and let the temperature go.
That was third generation. Usually we just turn the thermostat down on the air conditioning and let them heat up.
So how did you divide the responsibilities early on in production, in marketing, and all the components of a standard company?
Yeah.
Well, John, John was our original sales guy, and he had a table, and he had, remember the little pink slips you used to use instead of email to who called? And we would literally, as soon as Bill Joy got on board, we started getting calls from around the world, people saying, I want to buy. One guy, I remember, he called and he said, is Bill working at your company? We said, yeah. He said, I want 2 of whatever you got. What are you selling? That was literally some guy in Europe. We actually shut down Europe because we had a hard time supporting it for a while, so we shut it down until later. But John used to organize his pink slips by time zone. And he would come in the morning, he would just start on the left of his table and move right. So he was kind of sales. I did purchasing during the day, and I'd have like 4 or 5 lines lit up at one time. And then when they stopped ringing, which would be about 6 o'clock, I'd go back and get whatever had come in, unbox it, build the shelves, label the boxes, put the stuff in, and then I was writing a little early ERP program on our Onyx Unix box using VI to kind of do our bill of materials. And then Vinod did everything else. That was kind of what I did.
But the thing you didn't say about John and his slips is every once in a while John would just take all the slips and throw them in the trash. He said, it's high tech. If it's an important, they'll call back.
Just like email today.
Well, now jump ahead. Go ahead.
Can I go back to the technical environment at the time? Because I think what people, I mean, those of you old enough may remember this, but obviously we were running the same software environment as was running on the DEC VAX 750, 780 machines, which was actually what most of academia used. So they, people in academia would buy these DEC machines, throw out the VMS installation, call up Bill at Berkeley or his able assistant and get the tapes delivered, load up these tapes that were released from Berkeley, version 4.1 or whatever, and then rely on that Berkeley Unix to run their environment, right? And what they were going to get with the Sun machine was exactly the same software at 1/10 the price for the hardware. So it was a very compelling, value.
Hopefully the museum has at least one machine which could still read such a tape.
What made Andy such a great entrepreneur was he was always focused on this sort of value proposition without any marketing bullshit around it. And I think that was really...
Let me just remind you of that first Economist article with Andy in a white T-shirt, very thin, standing next to this ugly metal box. And the Economist headline was $10,000 graphic workstation. Do you remember this?
That's true, yeah.
$10,000. So when you added a disk, I think the price went up.
Well, we're still working on getting rid of this disk. But so going back to the early division of tests, so one of the problems we had actually was to hire a marketing guy, and this was actually it wasn't part of the venture financing that we had to hire a VP of marketing. And Vinod could say more what the issues were, but clearly we did okay without a marketing guy for a while.
I actually recommend most startups not hire a marketing guy for positioning till a little bit later.
All right, now jump ahead a bit. Sun went from first year, as I recall, $10.5 million to $50 million to $100 million, $119 million.
It was 8.5,
Books
39,
shipped.
110, 210, 450,
1 billion.
then $1 billion.
Yeah.
I lose track after that. 1.6. So those are the first X number of years.
Now, in that period, as we went from a tiny entity with 14 or so people to a $1 billion company, there were always in the press, people have opinions. People were saying, isn't it time to bring in more mature management?
There was the Wall Street Journal quote at one point in Q4 of '89 that said, I got to go, we got to bring in a senior manager like John Scully.
John, we did try getting in Owen Brown for a while. He lasted about 9 months.
Oh, less than that, but let's not talk about that.
Be nice.
Well, all right, but so now there's this period in a lifetime of a company where scale matters, and so there are different skills that you need.
But John, one thing to keep in mind is we were never a small company. We were a $0 billion company, not a $0 million company. And we fundamentally architected for that.
Is this a phrase used in the venture capital world, a $0 billion company?
You know, I gave a presentation on entrepreneurship in 1986 that I still have on my website. And it has that same slide of the difference between a $0 billion company and a $0 million company.
Talk a bit about the group of people you brought together.
And it's an attitude difference, right? It's an approach difference. It's how you architect the company. You can architect computers, but you can also architect companies.
So what did you say in that 1986 presentation about innovation and hiring talented people? How did you approach it then?
It was simple. Andy got Bill to join. Bill said, I won't join unless Laura and John Gage join. That was a precondition, correct? And then people started hopping in the boat. We got Bill Shannon and Tom Lyon and James Gosling and all of these folks who came to work with Bill and Andy. And recruiting was just me and Vinod staying out of the way.
It's like a bowling alley. You get the first spin. And that's why the rest get knocked down.
Sliner,
no,
Perkins,
but fundamentally, John,
when
I first met Andy, you have
no idea how hard my job is.
When I first met Andy, there were 6 licensees of all of the Sun technology. And Andy wanted me to license it because he had a year to go on his PhD. And he tried to convince me to license it. And my whole argument was I'd rather have Andy than the technology.
And so that's why the company formed.
And you know, as Scott said, once we got Andy, we got Bill. Because we got Bill, we got you and Eric and sort of half a dozen other people who got other people, started the ball rolling.
Today, people say Silicon Valley's in trouble. Silicon Valley, the United States are in trouble. There's not enough attention to innovation. There's not enough investment. If I bring up the simple 3-letter H1B, what do I hear from you? What's the status today as compared with 1982?
Scott feels strongly about it.
Yeah, how'd they let you in? I mean, that's the. I mean, both these guys weren't born here. James Gosling wasn't born here, and you go around and look at the innovation that Sun has, and in the microprocessor space, in the alpha. We are absolutely. We're just torching ourselves by not letting all of the really smart people come here to the Valley. And in fact, we shouldn't let them in unless they commit to staying for 10 years after they get their degree. And we got exactly the opposite strategy. What do we want them to come here, get married, have kids, and then they won't leave and do the brain drain back to their home country. And it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating that this isn't so brain dead obvious. But why would we want another James Gosling or Andy or Vinod to come to our geography and our country and set up shop here? You know, how many billions of dollars of taxes have you paid, Andy? I mean,
let's not talk about that.
You are hardly a burden on our society.
Well, it's a moment when we began in 1980. The IITs fought more amongst themselves than organized as they have today alumni associations. Vinod, you've been very involved in TIE to be able to put money from the Valley into India in particular. China is exploding. How would a company of, well, I called up today to find out the most recent badge number, 198,897. So we're almost 199,000 badges. That's just people that are Sun employees. The contractors and those that cycle in and out and change their status, move out, move back in. When you look at the fan out of this, at some point you could assert that every CTO in Taiwan, many people in Japan, people in Korea, passed at some point or another through Sun. So there's a family here. In fact, here is a family. There's a family.
I feel like an earthworm or something. Huh?
Well, remember the motto of the Computer Museum, get them on tape before they die. You know?
Hi, son.
We've got you. So now thinking about the next 5 or 10 years, here's a big company. It's had hundreds of millions of people, in some sense, touched by the technology that it's spread. How do you see the next 5, 10 years globally? Barriers are down. The conditions are different today. People believe today, at one point you said it's a more mature world, and there's an acceptance of open standards in a way there never was 20 years ago. How do you see the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, you're a futurist.
Well, there's more opportunity now than before because there's more disciplines in which there's the same kind of opportunity. Moore's law brought information technology. Information technology enables now other disciplines. So the breadth of the business plans, incredible, creative, innovative plans you see is just stunning, and is far more than you'd see in the things that worked. I didn't obviously see all the plans 20 years ago. That wasn't the business I was in. But if you look at what you're seeing now and you realize what's going to be successful from these things, it's stunning.
Here's what else is different. There were huge geographic barriers when we got started, like trying to do business in Europe with the virtual network. They aren't there. And brand was a huge barrier because people didn't know and see or trust. But I remember when Netscape came up with their browser, Netscape went from a non-brand to a brand just seemed like everybody knew in our industry. Now, look at what has happened with the most stunning brand we've ever seen with Google. Do you know anybody on the planet who doesn't know the Google brand? It's just, but you know what? We're going to get surprised at how fast a new brand gets created sometime in the next 5 years. And it's going to make Google look like Netscape, which made us look like Sun, which made, it's just, these things are very explosive, and with there's like 7 million people joining the network every week. 7 million new people joining the network every week. And there's still an enormous amount of growth. If we add 7 million people every week through 2007, 3 out of 4 people will still not be connected to the network. If you think about it, the digital divide is still large. So we're still in the very, very early days of driving the network, of bridging and eliminating this digital divide challenge, and then it's going to be actually very stunning when you can put, another set of few billion people onto the network, adding value and participating. So there's going to be a lot more stuff. We always get surprised, and you get older and older, the more surprised you get, I guess.
Well, that's a serious issue for a mature company. How do you recognize the Andy Bechtolsheims and the Bill Joys today? Is there a place in these big companies for them? Is there an active recruiting? I still remember Dave Ditzel at one point was keeping track of the time he spent as a serious engineer at Sun. He wasn't content unless more than half his time was spent recruiting. I thought that was a big number. And is that the case still? Or how do we regenerate companies like Sun and Sun's bought how many companies over the last 24 years? 100?
Yeah, at least, and we'll continue. We got Andy and a bunch of bright people back. We bought other big companies that have people who have stayed very loyal. You do it through acquisitions. You hire out of school. You do a lot of recruiting. The number of resumes, and we actually have a lot of what we call boomerangs. My door gets hit with boomerangs every day. People wanting back in. I wish we could hire all of them back in, but you know what? The community development actually says we don't have to bring them all back in. The openoffice.org community development, like we did with BSD, the Open Solaris community development, 950 companies with the Java community process are all helping. The entire Java desktop system is all based on open source community developed. The grid environments that we're creating, gone are the days where they all have to be your employee and it's all clutch and grab and tree hug. It's a much more open and shared environment, and there's lots of money to be made for a lot of people without having to go closed and proprietary. At least that's our fantasy.
Bill, what was your rule about innovation? You used to say
it occurs elsewhere.
It occurs elsewhere.
Well, simple rule.
Most bright people don't work for you, and so if your plan depends on nothing changing, you talk about openness, Scott. I remember before we started Sun, I tried to buy a printer from Xerox to hook to the VAX, and they wouldn't tell me how it worked because they didn't want me to hook it to the VAX. They didn't want to sell it to me. That was the old days, and that was the industry when we started the company, is people didn't want things to work together. And so that was a sea change, really.
We had a senior executive from a very large mini-computer company at one point who wanted to shut down our Catalyst catalog program, which was the catalog of software that ran on Sun OS. And we said, why don't you want to go out and recruit people to... He said, because that will compete with our OEMs. So he didn't want us to recruit. Can you imagine, like, trying to do an operating system and not wanting people to write to your application environment? So there was some very warped and different perspectives that seem a little quaint, to be kind, today, when you look back at where people were. And you coming in and wanting to open source NFS was one of the most enjoyable meetings in 1983 when he wanted to open source NFS, and all of the mini computer execs we had on board were like, those are the corporate jewels. You don't do that.
In fact, when the company started, the only CAD workstations were the ones that were bundled software and hardware solutions, which made no sense because you had to build a custom workstation to run computer vision or some vertical application.
I'm still waiting for the day when my kids walk in and say, Daddy, did you really own a computer? Because that's the right answer. And we someday will get to the point, Jonathan Schwartz, our COO, likes to tell the story about the story of the beginning of the electrical industry and electricity, that every company had a CEO, the chief electricity officer, whose whole job was to bring power to every room and piece of equipment in the organization. And in some sense, the concept of a CIO at Ford is as antiquated someday as having a chief electricity officer at Ford today. So those models will change very, very quickly. And at some point, it's going to tip when people move to the grid. And by the way, you all spend way more time on the grid than you do your company computer. Because every time you get in the browser and go out over the network, they use the eBay grid or the Google grid or the E-Trade grid or whatever, you're using utility computing, and that model's changing very, very quickly.
Well, Vinod, you've been quoted, and David Kirkpatrick has written in Fortune, you've been often quoted about a huge change coming, in some sense, open sourcing technology around energy. Moving completely, as Scott would point out, what's the point in trying to have things work together that aren't designed in the beginning to have the interfaces exposed? Do you see in other industries opportunities where what the computer industry learned is now?
So let me make a quick comment on your question around innovation in a company like Sun or any other company. First, whenever I look at the history of DEC, and DEC was our principal competitor, there was only 3 interesting products in its whole lifetime: the PDP, the VT100 terminal, and the VAX. I mean, everything else was incremental and not very innovative beyond sort of these initial products. And it was probably created by 1 or 2 people throughout DEC's history when it survived. If you look back, it doesn't take very many people. It takes a few of the right people, and it takes allowing that innovation to happen, to not shut down the Sun Catalyst catalog. Enabling people, empowering those people, recognizing who they are, and letting them go outside the box. I mean, I have no question that the Kalia box that Andy's been working on, what's it called now? I forget the new name.
Sunfire Z something.
Z something or the other. I don't feel bad since he doesn't know the name either.
Yeah.
But
he knows, and he'll take an invoice at any moment.
One simple product can renovate a company. Without going into lots of detail, I think a few of the things Andy's working on, 1 or 2 things, Bill did that with Java, can completely change the trajectory. And in the computer business, and this is the Computer History Museum, so we can talk about it, there's not a lot of innovation going on in the traditional world. I mean, I don't see that happening. I don't see anything new out of Dell, which is the new DAC. And they have a wonderful distribution system and channel, and you have to give credit. That's where that innovation happened. Or in HP or in IBM. They've essentially given up on innovating, and I think a few innovative people will make all the difference in the context of the Sun business. But my personal view is no matter where you look, there's an opportunity for innovation. You can't say we want to do things the same way and complain that there's no innovation. So that is Larry Ellison's model of why innovation is dead. I just want to look within my narrow domain, keep doing the incremental thing, and then claim there's no innovation. I look at every significant problem as a significant opportunity for innovation. You know, this light bulb here has been the same since the 1800s, bugs the hell out of me, and I have no doubt 15 years from now we won't have incandescent light bulbs. That's an opportunity for innovation. Energy, you mentioned, is sort of my new passion. I think there's relatively simple solutions to energy, and I'll go on a propaganda pitch for those of you who are interested in contributing either energy or money to a new ballot initiative we filed in California on completely eliminating the need for imported petroleum in this country within a relatively short period of time. Yeah. Send in money with the claps. But there's absolutely, and for those of you who are interested, on the KPCB website, there's a presentation I have on biofuels, which easily replaces petroleum. You have to just think outside the box. So without going into details of that, unless people here are interested, I would say there are innovative, clever ideas. Edward Land said innovation is the cessation of stupidity. That's one of my favorite quotes. So there are opportunities, whether you're looking in medicine or energy or lighting or you name your favorite area. I can give you 5 ideas of really innovative directions to take.
Now, you've focused on a few of the innovations that could alter the balance of power in the world when you think in a broad sense.
Energy is definitely a geopolitical issue.
As you look outside the door of this room, there are 4 people whose faces are on placards out there. Baran, packets in the beginning of the ARPANET. Shugart, disk storage. Doug Engelbart, the human interface with computers, man-machine symbiosis. And Ivan Sutherland. So those 4 were picked by the Computer Museum as fellows, and they're just a random set. Well, not so random, because those are the 4 fundamental components of what Sun built, in some sense. Those ideas emanating from Sketchpad, the 1973 doctoral thesis, about the human interface with a machine that had behind it the ability to allow a line drawn by hand to be perfectly straight, hence CAD, and on into computer graphics. And I remember, Bill, you said back at the beginning of Sun, more money's going into Atari and the graphics for games than into all science and supporting its understanding of the world. So are we just 24 years from the founding of Sun elaborating the same ideas fundamentally important, or are we doing something that might make a jump forward? What's the newest, most powerful?
Well, the gaming chips are still very powerful scientific chips, much more so as probably still being invested there than was the same situation as we had in '82, because it's now one of the largest entertainment industries.
Now, you were talking about consumer spending on like video games.
Well, in a way, I'm trying to turn it to investment in technologies, because in a way, the old ideas, the turn of the century ideas of quantum, there we are pressing quantum barriers now. We were not doing this in 1982. Now we are. We're pressing in chip design. We're pressing in you've always, from the beginning, said Ethernet. Why I like 10 megabit, I like 100 megabit, I like 1,000 megabit, and I don't see a reason for it not to continue. So the limits, though, that we begin to reach as we make devices ever smaller, the small handhelds that Bill was talking about at the very beginning, the 2006 analogy to the Sun workstation of 1982, at some point, as we make these devices smaller and ever more energy efficient, we run into some.
Well, the International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors, the 2005 edition, just came out, and for the first time there's a new section, because Moore's Law in traditional lithography, they now are starting to look past it. There's a list of candidate technologies late in the next decade will be necessary because everything goes red, which means we don't know how to do it. And at some point, without a really innovation, we won't be able to do it anymore because we're getting down to places where the materials don't scale. At some point, maybe we won't be able to continue advancing as fast, but I think there's enough candidate technologies that we can probably segue to something else.
John, the general way of saying that is I don't believe, as a technology optimist, I can say there are no limits. We do limit ourselves in what we believe is possible, and that becomes our limit. But I don't believe in the next 100 years there's any limits.
100 years? Wow.
Well, at least
I'm going to hold you to that, man.
Yes.
I plan on being around.
But I think what I'm trying is that, clearly there's a lot of momentum right now in consumer electronics, digital media, audio, video, distribution, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a wonderful market opportunity. Sun itself is not, primarily in this business. But the point is that, very low-cost chips that are low power and have lots of transistors make great enablers for consumers to enjoy their music or their video on the go. And this is just something that wasn't possible before because it was too expensive. So the fact that there's all this excitement around the iPod or the VPod or whatever comes next is natural because it extends what consumers want to do. And I don't see anything wrong with that then drives more investment in lower power technologies and other things that make that better. It's just
I want to explore, you just brought up an interesting topic because over the years as Sun grew, it found itself in an ecosystem. There was IBM, there was DEC. The Burroughs and all those had gone away. Then as time went on, the compatriots, the same generations, the Ciscos came. And over the years, there were a relationship with a few specific technology companies that have been interesting and convoluted. One is Microsoft, one is Intel, and one is Apple. So here is Apple riding the crest of the iPod. Scott owns an iPod but doesn't use it, as I understand. So you just came from consumer electronics. What do you see? Well, maybe you should step back a bit and describe, how many times did we try to buy Apple? 3, was that? 3 times? You're not going to count.
I think there's a couple of things that are going on. There are still large economies of scale when you're dealing with actual equipment. So equipment suppliers, there's large economies of scale. And IP is becoming a barrier to entry as people use patents and intellectual property to protect their market positions. Brand is still used as a barrier to exit. But it's interesting, there haven't been any other computer companies that started after Sun. We were the last computer company, server company that's survived. IBM is still there. HP's kind of checked out in the sense that they don't really do their own microprocessor, operating system, web services, stack, or whatever. And at some point, you can't OEM all your parts and call yourself a car company, become a car dealer. What's also fascinating about our industry, there's no BMW equivalent in the computer industry in Europe, and there's no Toyota in Japan. It really has gotten down to us and IBM as the only 2 companies doing R&D. And then we have the wild card I call Microsoft and Intel. I call that General and Motors as kind of the other major R&D investor. That's pretty fascinating to me that something this big, this fundamental has kind of consolidated down. The major R&D is being done by AMD, Intel, Microsoft, Sun, and IBM in the infrastructure space. The other thing that's happening is there's this pendulum thing where stuff ends up on the client and then gets put back in the network where it belongs. And then it shows up on, something new shows up on the client and then gets put back. It's kind of like your answering machine puts your voicemail by your desk and then eventually went back into the network with the service provider. And your iPod is like your home answering machine. It's a temporary thing. And I guarantee you, it's going to be hard to sell a lot of iPods 5 years, 7 years from now when every cell phone can automatically, instantaneously access your entire library wherever you are, and you don't have to carry 2 devices around. So there's this pendulum or swinging back and forth. And today we all carry around our desktops, and we all have root password. We're a system administrator to a file system and an operating system. As we go to what we call DOIP, display over IP, that will go away and you'll get very thin on your desktop as you have very good network. There's just a lot of these transitions that are going on in the industry that I think are pretty interesting now that we've got a couple of decades to look back at them.
John, I'll answer your Apple question, though, because, I mean, for me, it's a personal disappointment. I've known Steve Jobs for many years, and I had 5 separate times where I tried to do something major with Apple, and none of them happened. The first time was I tried to get Apple, Sun, and Microsoft to do a common filing protocol before we did NFS. And I actually had what you call, I guess we'd call now a term sheet. We had an agreement, but it fell through because someone else showed up and somebody got knocked over. I think it was Microsoft fell out and then Apple fell out. So we got close to doing that.
Remember when we went and visited him to go do the
It was 6 times. You reminded me of another one.
Yeah.
It's like Charlie Chan. Then we tried to get Apple and Sun to share the user interface for the merged Unix that we did.
That's a great story. We went over to Steve's house, and Bill and I went over. I don't know if you were there or not, but he was sitting under a tree when we got there with, no shoes, and he had holes in his knee. He was sitting kind of lotus style reading How to Make a Nuclear Bomb. We sat down with him and said, why don't we work together on a UI? And that never went anywhere.
No, and then we tried to do...
there is a common UI
when Apple
for
was
nuclear
switching,
bomb, a red button.
which is contemporary. This week Apple switched away from RISC with their first Intel processor, but when they were switching to RISC, we went and get very close to having Apple use Spark. That didn't happen. Twice you asked about buying Apple. As far as I know, we only almost bought Apple once, but we almost merged with Apple 2 other times. So I know of 3 instances where the companies almost came together. So that's a total in the 20 years that I was in this business doing it at Sun.
Yeah, think how successful he would have been had he
There were
done
6
that.
close. There were 6 very, very close encounters, and you'll see a lot of major companies that have survived over multiple decades in the Valley, but there haven't been that many, kind of Valley mergers of the kind. Any one of those would have been a big deal, and I think they were all good ideas, and none of them, frustrating for me at least, because I pushed almost all of them. None of them happened. So bring me your venture up.
There's no pattern there. There's no pattern.
I do remember one. It was 91, I think, maybe 92, and it was April Fool's Day. And Scully was going to have his staff meeting, and you were going to have your staff meeting. And so we arranged that we'd switch the vice presidents, and each would go to the other's staff meeting.
It's true.
And we made up we asked the PR
Was
people.
I on vacation?
You were there.
You were there.
Larry Tesler came into your staff office and presented as if he were Bill Joy. And we made the 8x10.
Right?
We made the masks by the 8x10 glossies from the PR department, and you cut the eyes out. And you then put them on. And I can't remember. Were you Tesla?
I went to Apple, and Scully came in, and he looked kind of stone-faced, believing there was some terrorist takeover.
He couldn't decide until Andy began talking. How many tall, skinny, German-accented people are there that will get up in front of it?
You understand this was a joke, so.
He thought it was until Ditzel launched into, how much money have you spent on Hobbit, that secret project to take the old Bell Laboratories chip and make an Apple?
Should we let them ask some questions?
We shall in just a minute, because I still have 2 more questions. One is about the Microsoft relationship. Over the years, Scott, you've become famous. Everybody else has been relatively quiet, but you've been famous for playing hardball hockey with Steve Ballmer. And now, as we said at the very beginning, there's a different feeling. Is it maturity? Is this the proper? Or is it's just the economy. It's the economy and business relations. Describe this transition over the relationship with Microsoft over the years.
It's pretty simple. The world, we were talking, Bill and I, earlier about how many different programming environments that included an operating system, ABI or API, user interface, networking scheme, and microprocessor environment. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of developer communities around separate. How many did DEC have? You said they had 22 different operating systems.
It was 20-something for the PDP-11 alone, which is one of the reasons they had trouble adopting Unix, is because they had been so debilitated by having so many PDP-11 choices. They wanted one answer for the values.
You had the bunch. You had all the European and Asian API. And if you think about it now, if you're going to go do a startup, you're going to go either do .NET, Vista, that whole thing, or you're going to do Java, JavaScript, and the Java Web Services stack. Those are kind of the two platforms. And the world has really gotten down to those two answers. And it was really kind of incumbent upon the two companies, as kind of the leader of those two efforts, to provide interoperability, to bury the hatchet and stop all of the noise. There was a lot of it was just theater and fun anyhow. I mean, I miss those days because they come to me and I just can't share them anymore.
You're among friends, Scott. Yes, you can say a few of them.
But it really isn't more. So we're working very hard, and there's lots. Greg Papadopoulos is spending a lot of time with Bill Gates, and the technologists are working to go make the .NET Web Services and the Java Web Services environment work together and interoperate. And I think that's just a necessary reality of the position both companies are in.
We're going to move to questions, and there'll be a microphone in each of the aisles. So if you have a question, go find the microphone in the aisle, stand in line, and get ready. And I'll ask the last question, which is for all three except Scott. Sun has now open sourced pretty much everything, including the hardware. Can you describe what the rest of you, what you think of Sun's strategy in this? Let's start with Bill.
Is this like a public performance review? Is that
yes. Yes. They don't work for you anymore, Scott. It's a
Can I have $20, Scott?
Well, I think that's the theme that we had in the beginning, and it's good to see it coming around again. And I think also that just Andy returning to the company and building some of the incredible designs he and the other engineers have been working on. You put those two things together, and it gives me a lot of hope for the trajectory of the company.
When are you coming back?
Vinod, your chance to answer here. He's always recruiting. You see, it never stops. So, what do you think, Vinod?
So, as Bill said, Sun's back to its strategy of open systems. And really never really departed from it very much, but there was lots of noise along the way. It's not about the strategy as much as about execution and clear thinking. And I think, personally, between what the company has in terms of channel and brand and customers and all that, and what a few people like Andy are doing by themselves, will completely change the environment, or has the potential to. It's really a matter of execution, and Sun will do as well as it executes on the strategy.
So, Andy, you have a point of view about this that is, of course, unique. As Sun employee number one, then at one point being bored with things, you said, I think I can make a faster switch than Cisco, and you made Granite Systems. I think it was a couple of months it took you to get them to give you $220 million, was it, yes, so that you could make a gigabit Ethernet switch. And then you went to Cisco for a while, and then you started Kalia, and now you're back at Sun. And so implementation is resting on your shoulders. How do you think things are going?
Well, I'm glad to be back at Sun, but I was going to comment on the open source stuff. It's actually surprising how tough it is to give stuff away. I mean, you would not believe it, even for free.
Sir, would you say who you are, and are you an ex-Sun person or a customer, or?
My name is Mike Calise. I'm with a company called ClearSpeed Technology. And my question is, can you comment on the trends, both short-term and maybe medium-term, on what to expect in high-performance technical computing, that computing around math and science, versus sort of enterprise and web-based? Right. And that's open to all.
Yeah, so I'm personally very interested in the high-performance market for one particular reason, which is that it's basically an open-ended requirement in terms of how much compute power people would like to have to solve their problems faster. And this is in contrast to other markets where, if you run the same database, this year versus next year, you don't need a faster computer to do it next year. Whereas in high-performance computing, you always want to get more cycles to solve the problem at hand more quickly. So this, to me, is actually one of the most promising growth areas for both the industry as well as for Sun. And I'm personally quite involved in helping us to make more progress there.
Describe in particular the challenges. Thermal, for example.
Thermal?
Thermal, heat.
Well, there's power consumption and cooling, right, which is a major problem, just keeping these things running. It's also becoming a large cost of running a computer is, in fact, the power. And we do need much more power-efficient technologies. And one area where SPARC and RISC is doing really well is actually by doing many, many cores per chip, which individually take less power and thus, in aggregate, have more throughput than the industry standard architectures.
I guess my frustration, John, when we talked about Sun for the first time in 1982 is that the graphics on game, even the primitive game machines at the time, for the cost was so impressive compared to what scientific computing had. And if we look today, now it's many years later, there still aren't the kind of commodity cost scientific machines that we saw for commodity cost personal machines. The high performance scientific machines tend to be very expensive. I was very impressed with the cell chip that IBM did inside of some of the new gaming machines. It's very similar to an architecture that I was working on at Sun almost a decade ago, and yet that chip exists in gaming consoles and is proposed in gaming consoles. Where do we see that kind of price performance for scientists and people doing research? We don't see that because those chips are not commodity to that market. And that's an incredible disappointment, which has been a constant theme for a very long time.
Let me answer in a different way. Started off with Cray, and then the RISC chips came in, and if you look at the top 500, there were a lot of RISC. SPARC in the earlier days was big. Then all of a sudden, people figured out how to strap together the Intel and now Opteron products using Linux, and that's kind of where we are today. You're seeing another shift. We just won with Andy's machine, TITEC, Tokyo Institute of Technology, for what probably will be Japan's largest and biggest. And Japan takes supercomputing very seriously, running Solaris and Linux, and with open source Solaris, with ZFS, and the Opteron boxes, and dtrace, which allows people to actually look in and see what's going on. You're going to see, I think, a new move over the next 3 or 4 years to open Solaris on Opteron as a new architecture with some of the file system and tuning technologies. Beyond that, DARPA is funding 3 efforts today in supercomputing, one from IBM around power, one from Sun around a next generation CMT strategy called ROC from Sun, and then Cray. And I believe when they go to the next phase, it's going to end up being Sun and IBM as the 2 players. And so starting in about 4 years from now, it's going to be ROC versus power in the supercomputer space, really driving. And there might be some other wild card entrants like the cell or others as people find ways to drive that. But to me, that's where it looks, and we're certainly investing very aggressively to go drive the entire system technology that would allow you to do large-scale supercomputing on a publicly available grid.
How deep is the pipeline, Bill, for a cell processor as contrasted with ROC? It's a deep pipeline machine, or it's a...
I don't remember anymore.
Do you know, Andy? Is there
We're all getting older.
No, we're getting lost in things later. But what I was going to comment is that the HPC market is, of course, there are major opportunities to innovate, for one, but it's also one of the few markets where Bill Joy's law, which is that things get better by, about 60% per year in terms of cost performance, actually applies. So if you look at the long-term cost of dollars per gigaflop or teraflop in high-performance computing, that is the one market where Bill's projection actually has been very accurate.
Well, I was talking about over 30 years, if you look at the grand challenge kind of applications, on many of them, scientific computers got faster as much from the algorithms as they did from the hardware, if you can believe that. Say on some, and I think if you look at the challenges in the future, doing things with, computational biology or, understanding the brain and simulating with thinking, whatever the brain does, that we want to make these kind of computations run faster. They'll speed up as much as a Moore's law curve would suggest. So you take the product of Moore's law with this other factor, which is the effective speed up on the problems that are really hard, the number is just staggering.
Invest in
and most people would not believe that over 30 years on those hard problems you can speed up, a factor of 2 every somewhat repeatedly. It's just astonishing that you
But
can.
you think it can be
like
done?
1 million times over the last 30 years, and like finite element methods of certain kinds, 1 million times speed up in the algorithms.
So it is invest in the mathematicians.
Times 1 million times speed up in the hardware. So you got 1 million times speed up. It's a lot.
So that gives room for 100 years of technical optimism, doesn't it?
Why don't we keep moving?
Yes, sir.
Eugene Mia, one of the liaisons to the museum. With the history of Sun, two questions come to my mind. One of them a technical question, and the other one a sort of policy, social question. I understand the reason why you guys got started. I actually used, and you guys haven't mentioned so far, a sail terminal in Margaret Jack's Hall. It's quite impressive in many respects. And so the technical question is, roughly how long was it, either by time or model number, were you guys finally able to make a workstation at least emulate something as powerful as the old sail terminals that used to say, take me on yours? And the second question I had, actually, which is more oriented towards Scott, is it has to do with the creation of Sun Federal Systems. And that's in light of the recent disclosure of terrorist communications and the like. I was wondering, when Sun Federal got created, were you privy to this system they may refer to in the media called Echelon, as an example? So those are my two questions. One social, one.
Okay, so let me answer the first one, which is one thing that is not publicly known about Sun is that we actually, after the company started, we actually rented time on the Sail computer at Stanford to keep doing our CAD work because the CAD software wasn't running on the Sun workstation yet. It actually took us, I think it was about 3 years to get a reasonable CAD system, even after we got going. So those of me who remember me being around Stanford at weird hours during those years, that's why. But we do appreciate it very much, John, here.
This is the SUDS system?
This was the SUDS system, which was a high-quality system. It just ran on the mainframe.
How long did it take before we didn't need sail anymore?
1985.
1985, 3 years.
Well, this is the period, as I recall.
The answer was 3.
Yes, the answer was 3. It also showed the maturity. SUDS would allow you to scrunch all the elements on a board so closely that you wouldn't be able to insert test probes.
Actually, it's not quite the answer to your question, because to truly replace SAIL, which had multimedia capability, including video and audio, we didn't have that, I don't know, until a few years ago. So you could argue it took 20 years. Okay.
And the second question was Echelon.
So I don't talk about secret Homeland Security stuff. Next question, thank you.
Well, I have one. You mentioned Scott's comment on privacy. I can recall this vividly because Bill had worked very diligently to create a method for distributed computing that would utilize to some degree the security model of Java. So the notion was that you would be able to allow all devices to speak with each other on the net. And they'd say, well, there's a common meeting area, and we will allow any entity to query any other entity. And so after the demonstration, it showed the printers talking about how they were offering printing services and all this was going to work. Then Scott was on stage and someone said, well, what about privacy when all the devices are talking with each other?
Well, now you're going to really get me in trouble, aren't you?
You said, well, privacy, get over it.
You have no privacy, get over it.
You have no privacy, get over it. And that, in some sense, a very accurate observation
it's
about
getting
the
more
world.
clear as everybody's walking around with a camera in their pocket now. Everybody's got recording devices, and at some point people are just going to kind of put this right here, and they're going to walk around and record their entire day, and it's all going to get archived.
You're not doing that yet?
Well, that's why we bought a tape company, because we figured there's going to be a lot of archiving.
Next question.
It's all in the editing.
Scott, I thought your analogy of the iPod to the answering machine was actually quite apropos. In fact, your iPod with gratified to hear that we're working towards making that happen at Sun Labs. But I'm actually, this is kind of an easy question. I'm just kind of curious. First, why you don't use your iPod, and if you're not using it, could I have it?
Any yes, no answer, Scott?
Yeah, well, Susan, do the kids want this? I mean,
I just don't know. I just never have time, and when I'm at home, you don't. With 4 little boys, they're 4, 6, 8, and 10. You don't you got to hear, because if you don't hear anything, you got to be scared. So, it's just I don't ever do it at home, and when I'm on an airplane, I'm sleeping. Or reading hard copy, and when I'm driving in the car, I'm listening to KCBS and getting angry. And other than that, there's just no other time to listen. So, and my wife doesn't really like it when I come home and put on my iPod. Hi, honey. How's it going, huh? She'd rather converse. So I don't get a lot of music in my life right now.
Not that he converses anyway, but.
Well, that brings up another question. How do you?
The answer is no. You can't hear my iPod.
So there's another question. How do all of you converse? You see each other occasionally. You both at Kleiner Perkins see each other daily.
Email works great.
Yeah, email is the principal way, though. Bill and I have been doing a lot together in a lot of different areas recently, and
Andy is implementing, so he doesn't have time to talk to anybody.
I spend too much time on email, so.
We do occasionally discuss water systems.
Next question.
Yes, commenting on the last fellow's iPod question. I use an iPod while I'm running LSD runs, which are long, slow distance, not the drug. Anyway, my question was that would you comment on your Java compiler and how developers integrate with the Microsoft Windows environment as opposed to the Unix environment?
So the Java Virtual Machine is available on the Sun website for free download. It happens 20 million plus times per month. People just run into a website. There's 7 to 10 million websites out there that have Java content. And if it's not, about 2/3 of the PCs being shipped today come with a Java Virtual Machine loaded automatically in your browser. Those that aren't, you just go to the website, click, it downloads like a Flash player or whatever, a Real Player or whatever, and it just loads and then away you go. So just go to sun.com and you'll look, there'll be a button there. It's probably on the home page, download now, and you'll be one of tens of millions of people who do that every month. So that's the simplest way to get Java running on your Windows environment. It's free too. So I mentioned it doesn't.
How do you make money then if you're giving all this stuff free?
That's what my shareholders are asking all the time. What we're doing is building a very large community for the Java platform, and in fact, there's over 3 billion Java devices out there. There was a major announcement at CES that all of the cable companies worldwide are signing up for OCAP, which is the Open Cable Application Platform, based on the Java platform. The Blu-ray technology, all the volume DVD players. Think about a $100 DVD player with all the storage, basically being a Java personal computer in your home connected to all of your multimedia environment. There are 1 billion plus Java cards out there. Every cell phone out there practically has got Java built into it. All of these desktop environments and all these if every appliance out there on the planet is Java enabled, chances are we got a really good shot at selling the CPU, DRAM, disk drive, server infrastructure on the back end. If it's a Windows phone, chances are you're not going to buy our server on the back end because it's a closed proprietary. It doesn't mean we win the server deal if it's a Java device, but we got a shot at it. So by opening up and creating a very large Java appliance community with open, multi-vendor, community-developed, shared environments, we got a chance to sell servers. So that's how we make money. This is our razor. That's the blade.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So John, I wanted to answer your question about how we get together. I mean, I had the great pleasure of working with Andy and with Scott for a very long time at Sun. Vinod went to KP in '86, I think. And now I'm at KP with getting a chance to work with Vinod and with John Doerr, who also has been involved and still on the Sun board.
John here?
But he's on the Sun board since, what, '82 sometime, right? So he has been with the company as long. So, and also John with you, of course, going back since before we started Sun. So it's been my great pleasure now to really get to work with John and Vinod more closely is a great pleasure for me. But it's all the same cast of characters for me.
It is an interesting thought that the Valley, which ordinarily is not thought of as a political entity, John Doerr was a driving force behind an initiative in California years ago, and he brought everyone in the Valley together to say, well, there's an attempt to make every officer of every corporation personally liable when the stock price fluctuates. And so that initiative, he got his feet wet to some degree. And now, Vinod, now you have a political initiative. So it's an interesting thought that high technology companies, the most advanced venture capitalists, are taking to the ballot box to do something that affects public policy.
I'm not going to be successful or not. I'm trying a simple thing, which is cut down the use of petroleum, and I think there's some pretty simple solutions. While we start dreaming about 2040 and hydrogen, all that crap. By the way, I believe hydrogen will never ever happen, and it's not needed either. So, but when you see a simple idea that makes sense, you try and push it, and it's sort of the old engineer in you.
We can get on to nuclear in a minute. Sir.
Yes, hello. My name's Alex Mednick. I was at Sun in the late 80s, and I now work at Ecomas, mortgage banking software based on open source technology. And I applaud all the efforts towards open source and Java and making devices and applications available in all devices and places. But I'm wondering, what do you think prevents this whole movement? What is it about people that they stay with Microsoft and they don't really see the value of this? And what are we missing here? Why isn't there more widespread use of this now? And let's just really think about what's holding us back.
So my view is there's massive barriers to exit. And people don't think when they adopt technologies what the escape clause is. There's a shelf life of a banana with every piece of technology you're going to buy. Within 18 months, no matter what you buy from anybody, it's absolutely obsolete within 18 months. Yet when we do a purchase decision at the corporate level, we think about what is the purchase price, the barrier to entry. We think about the ongoing cost of operation, the net present value of the lease costs and the air conditioning and the operation and the upgrade. We never think about the exit cost. And the exit cost dwarfs, absolutely dwarfs, by an order of magnitude, the other two costs. And whenever purchasing agents do their analysis, they only do A and B and they forget C. And C is A plus B times 10 minimum. And as a result, we end up getting into switching off of the PC. Is something we'd all love to do, but we can't because the exit costs are so high. The mainframe is equivalent to an airplane with pedals. It is so obsolete. I mean, it is just, the price performance of that hog is unbelievable. What the barrier to exit is, in fact, the barrier to exit might be infinite now because everybody's dead who knows what's inside that thing. You got to go down and read the tapes downstairs to figure out what's going on inside those things. So that's what's preventing people. Plus, there's a lot of anthropology. There's a lot of where does my job go if I move this direction. I walk into data centers everywhere, and they look like Frankensteins. Body parts from many different obsolete companies, and everyone looks unique. And why in the world why does Ford do a data center? They build cars, for gosh sakes. But there's just an anthropology and a way of doing business and a lot of marketing to convince you that Sun doesn't understand your business. We understand it deeply. We'll build something custom for you. And that's the IBM Global Services. We got more mechanics pitches. There's going to be a long, and Microsoft just floods the airways with, and Dell and Intel with, here, please become supercomputer or super user, root password systems administrator. Have any of you really enjoyed being systems administrator? I shouldn't ask this crew. Anybody hanging out in the computer museum on an evening, who probably enjoys being super user, but that's just not a mere moral. How many of you are super user to the telephone network? I mean, that's why you can make phone calls. And that's why he can listen to my phone calls.
Andy, you?
I was just going to comment, there's probably more business opportunities on open source and outside of the Microsoft domain, if you will, because anything that gets big in the Microsoft domain is something they want to take over, and then your business opportunity is zero.
It's mankind versus Microsoft. Yeah. Mankind will win.
But
I hope so.
But let me give you a slightly different, more optimistic view, which is Microsoft.
What, you want Microsoft to win, man?
No. Yeah, Microsoft did one thing well. They got a market. But if you really look around you, there's lots. It was a function that the PC did well. And the PC is great at it, and as Scott said, there's natural monopoly in these systems, and Microsoft got that position. But there's lots of new markets in open markets. Google's proven that. Apple has with the iPod and the consumer devices, where nobody has a natural monopoly. The bulk of the computing we do 10 years from now will not be just on a PC. I think the PC will still be around, but the bulk of what we do will be new uses, new applications. And I think those fields are wide open, as Apple's proving, Google's proving, Yahoo's proving, and I can go down the list.
I'm a Mac user, so I have to say, after all these years, we started Sun, we knew about what's going on at Xerox. If somebody finally put Unix together with the best in the world user interface and made a thing, I sent one to my father. He's been using Mac OS 9, and he's 80 years old, and he refused to change. And Christmas Day, he calls me and says, it doesn't work anymore, they can't fix it at the store. So I sent him an OS 10 machine expecting him to call me and ask me to help. And I bought Apple Remote Desktop so I could administer his computer. He just got it back up, and he installed it himself, and he's on the net, and he's sending me mail and says it all works fine. And he never even asked me a question. Now I'm flabbergasted. But, it really is that good. And people just don't know, and that's Unix in there, right?
It's even simpler than that. And my 6-year-old just logs into his Sunray, and he goes to his game sites, and he does his Java games from a browser, and he never asks me anything other than, can I play? And there's no user administration done in our house because there's nothing to administer, because it's just a flat panel display. And that's the next level of simplicity that we all need to get to. And
ubiquitous computing.
There you go.
Well, one aspect of this, take all the world, the 4 billion people that aren't involved in computing, that digital divide you were talking about, Scott. The ability to drop the energy, forget the price of the single screen, but just the energy demand. PC, well, there are some PCs now with the new LED technology that drop down under 10 watts. So we have but to go into a Rwanda as an example, to provide some access for people across a fiber network built out across the country, putting a simple screen at the end of that network.
It's going to be done wireless, so you don't even have to wire the joint. You can do it with 3G wireless technology and run DOIP over 3G wireless to very thin, stateless devices that are secure, safe, zero administration, and able to handle network intermittency, which a DOIP display does, because when the network goes down, your desktop keeps running in the network, and as soon as you get reestablished, away you go.
Well, so we began by discussing the tiny device, the cell phone, and in all the lists of companies and technologies and investments that we have cited as interesting, we left out Samsung. What are they now, $160 billion or so? Now, there's an entity that's investing with a PhD ratio that is very high, investing in research and investing in all the technologies that seemingly rule the next 5-10 years. How do you see the shift? Is there a shift from Silicon Valley to Korea or to Huawei or to in India, or any number of companies, Wipro, a number of companies? Do you see any fundamental change coming?
Well, they have low cost of capital, so they're making major capital investments and make more LCD panels than anybody else or whatever. It's similar to the Japanese 20 years ago, where the cost of capital was very low cost in Japan in the 80s. The cost of capital is higher in the US.
So in the 1980s, there was a view that Japan was the great threat. And today there's a view that possibly emerging and built on the back of open source, innovation can occur elsewhere by those that are investing
well, there's
in
a one-time opportunity to make a lot of money on flat panels right now, but once these get more mature and lower cost and more
It's
competitive.
not a zero-sum game, and anybody who's studied economics, it's not they're going to win at our cost. If they win, we'll do better. If we win, they'll do better. And it's that I don't know who's driving the fear that if somebody there goes to work, I'm going to lose a job here. It just isn't true. And we all have to work on eliminating the digital divide, getting everybody to work, everybody less ignorant, everybody more aware, and everybody standing on the shoulders of everybody else on the network, and everybody out there innovating and creating, and a lot of good things will happen. And it's not, I mean, you shouldn't, the only thing you should fear is that these developing countries don't develop, because that's what breeds the ignorance, the bitterness, the terrorism, all the rest of it. So the real important issue is that we get this technology out there, we get wireless out there, we get low cost, low power server technology, client technology out there, we get open source out there, we share, and we get everybody on the network, because I think it's just going to be a safer and better world if we can get that done.
Where is that battling, combative? This is a sharing initiative. This is something that puts the...
He invented it, man. This guy, you know, I always say we're a little Al Gore-ish when we say we invented community development and open source, but this guy really brought all of those ideas to the industry. He's never gotten credit for it. I keep saying it over and over and over again, but you know what he did, the model he put together at Berkeley with the Berkeley software distribution, which we did with NFS, which we did in the Unix community development, and which was the original site of what we did with the Java community process, and everything we've done around community development. As the largest donator of open source community, we've invented community development models, we've invented licensing models. You know, it all comes out of Bill's idea that innovation happens everywhere else. Len, crank up another frame down there. You got to put his picture up there. I really think he innovated in the most important way around community development.
Sir.
Hi.
Oh, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm Tony Wasserman. I was one of Sun's first ISVs, but never worked for Sun.
He was 12 when he got started.
Yeah, thank you. These days, I run the Center for Open Source Investigation at Carnegie Mellon West, right here in Mountain View. But you've talked a lot about the technology. But let's face it, 6 weeks from now, Sun is going to be 24 years old, and the way you get to grow and survive that long is by establishing some leadership principles inside the company and a culture inside the company that makes it survive and grow. And I'd really like to hear from any or all of you what you guys think there might be some guiding principles of culture or leadership that others could take away from your experience.
You guys do that.
Well, really, Scott, that's mostly for you, and it's not about hockey.
Come on. You know, it's pretty simple. I've always believed in the inverted org chart. I work for the people who report to me. I've also always believed that nice guys can finish first, that you don't have to cheat, lie, steal, or break the rules. And integrity and character has been an absolutely critical component of this company, and I don't think you can find many ex-employees at Sun who will tell you anything other than it was very high integrity, high character, not necessarily always competent, but a very high integrity, high character place, and we tried to let people work there and leave from Sun with dignity and respect, no matter what the circumstances were, unless they were a crook. And then I had no problem, foregoing the dignity and respect. And then it just developed a culture where people had pride, worked hard, did great things, and sharing. We didn't really start calling it sharing, but we've been talking about open interfaces forever, open systems for open minds or whatever. And we finally just said there's a simple word for what we do. We share. Very, very different and not necessarily as successful as, say, the Intel model or the Microsoft model or the mainframe model, but it's our model, and it hasn't treated any of the four of us poorly, nor has, I think, mistreated the nearly 200,000 employees that have come through, nor has it mistreated the dozens and dozens of CEOs that are now running other companies that worked at Sun, from Google on down through the rest of them. So to me, that's kind of what is most fundamental about it. And the buzz phrase at Sun is kick butt, have fun. We're going to go out and compete fairly and by the rules, but the big order is you got to have fun. You got to enjoy what you're doing. April Fool's jokes. We have a dress code. You must. We send you home if you come in not dressed, and it's just. Remember the guy came in from a mini computer company and got mad at Gilmore because he had his long denim skirt that he wore that had an embroidered whale jumping out of the water spouting, and I said, John, what are you wearing a skirt for? He says, yeah, we was working back in the cement floor assembly area, and he said, it gets really hot in the machine. It's just cooler with a skirt. And I go, I don't go ahead and wear your skirt. Anyhow, this guy came in from this meeting, and he wanted to change the dress code because he thought that when we did plant tours that people would get offended by seeing a guy in a skirt. And I said, au contraire, they'll think he's really, really smart. And I don't know. I digress, but I don't know. What do you guys?
A lot of CEOs will say the door is open, you can always come talk to me, and it's often not at all the case. Do you think, you've always had this style, let's go eat at McDonald's, let's go get our haircut at, what's the cheapest haircut place? Supercuts. Let's just go out in the cafeteria, for a period critical in Sun's growth, in the cafeteria, to get from engineering to the cafeteria, you had to walk along VP Row, because the pathway was stopped right by your office. So every engineer at Sun on their way to lunch could stick their head in your office and say, why did you say that? This is really how it is. So there was a direct feedback. And then the years when we moved to San Antonio and there was that giant Ford Aerospace building and you were up in the elevation and nobody can see you, there was this period of disconnect. And now it seems to be back to much more this day-to-day. Is that a big component? It strikes me it is, but what's your view?
Actually, we're using the network, so I do radio shows. I just recorded a radio show today that I do every couple of weeks. It's called the McNealy Report. It's on demand on the network, and I do pet peeves and what's cool, and I complain about the food in the cafeteria. I talk about a great deal we want, or I cold call employees anywhere in the world, and I just we just won a big $400 million deal down in Mexico, and I called the sales guy on it, and I said, hi, I'm from the Mexican education. We're canceling your order. He just started. I got this all on radio. He just started laughing. He obviously recognized my voice, but it's that kind of informal, open atmosphere that we try to create.
Good. Thanks.
Yes, next question.
Hi, my name is Tui, and I'm a Sun user and shareholder. So I have a question. There's been a lot of speculation about how Sun may go the way of SGI, which was once an industry titan and, major player, now reduced to a footnote. Do you have that fear? And
No.
What are the plans to?
So let me tell you what we have. We have $4.5 billion of cash in the bank. We're on our 17th straight year cash flow positive from operations. We have one of two developer communities that we lead with the Java community environment versus the .NET environment. We have one of three operating systems that I think matter anymore, with Windows, Solaris, and Red Hat being the three. And I kind of challenge any of you to go off and do a startup to go write some enterprise or web-based application environment, not to one of those three environments. We have one of the three microprocessor architectures that are left with Power, Spark, and the x64 architecture. We have a $150 billion installed base. We have a patent portfolio that's off the charts. We have probably the best product line we've ever had, from a hardware, storage. 36% of the world's archived data now resides on Sun's libraries. And if you don't think that's sticky, you're more likely to trade out your mainframe than you are your tape library. We have an incredibly important position, and we're the most partnered company in the world. We partner with Microsoft. I just did our big deal, Redwood City, with Oracle yesterday. TI is our fab partner from way back. EDS, Accenture, CSC, NEC, and the systems integration pieces. You look all around the world, we have thousands of applications. And the barriers to entry in our business are actually big because it takes a lot of capital to go do what we're doing. So I feel very comfortable that people are going to continue to need to buy servers. They're going to not want to build their own Frankensteins. There's very few companies like Google that are going to go off and do their own, computer grids. People are going to start wanting to buy the grids complete, or even use the grids in the public utility grid model. And it's us and IBM are the only two companies out there that can build a grid. Try and run Salesforce.com or eBay or Google on Windows.
Yeah.
So, it's us versus Red Hat, and I think we can beat Red Hat. So I feel very comfortable that, and I think Vinod was right. If we execute, if we stay focused, execute, pay attention to the details, and don't lose track of quality and service, I think the world is our oyster here from a technology perspective and a business opportunity perspective. We made some mistakes during the bubble, but we also put $7.5 billion of cash in the bank during the bubble too, so we didn't screw up too bad. We didn't spend it all.
So with the commoditizing of computers, the price of dropping,
Computers have been commoditizing forever, and that's not a fair statement because we're spending $2.2 billion. It has the shelf life of a banana. Commodities do not, in the hardware business, they do in the food business, but in the hardware business do not. A 10-penny nail is a commodity because 5 years from now it's still good. But a 10-year-old any technology piece is not good. Go down and look in there. Just look around here and see if you want anything that's more than 3 years old, more than a year old. Anything in this museum, if you want any of it. CPU hours are a commodity like kilowatt hours are a commodity. But the GE turbines that generate that power are anything but commodities. And the grid equipment that we're creating is anything but a commodity. It just generates a commodity of CPU hours, gigabyte months, display days, those sorts of things. So it's just a very different model.
So in other words, I should hold on to my Sun stocks?
Yes,
I'm there with you.
Thank you.
Has he convinced you, Twee? Sir?
Hi, how you doing? My name is Adam McDonald, and I breathe air. And my question is for Bill Joy.
Good.
I really liked his article in Wired 2000 about how the future doesn't need us. And I guess my question is, in your opinion, how many years do you think it'll be before we're living in a kind of like an Orwellian dystopia? If you believe that at all.
Cheery, before you.
I am so glad you got to answer that one.
The standard rule about the future is to predict what or when, but never both at the same time.
That's good. That's good.
I think, to be serious, Scott is right. I mean, technology and privacy are on collision courses. I mean, surveillance, and I'm not just talking about what the government is doing, but I don't know how many people here have used the latest video conferencing equipment, but if you're video conferencing into a room with some of the latest video conferencing equipment, you can hear conversations that other people in the room can't hear. I mean, it's quite amazing. You basically can eavesdrop into the room you're video conferenced into, or you're driving. Britain just announced that they're going to keep track of where all the cars are. Technology makes these things cheap and some people have proposed we just make all underlying data public so that anyone can do it, so at least we don't get a tip towards a government that is doing this for, preservation of power is usually what it's done for. But I think that the tip towards us, the public space being much less private, or even with terahertz radiation, the private space being much less private is one that's hard to fight because it's kind of got Moore's law on its side. So we have to fight to hold on to what we want with the law, but technology doesn't make that easy.
And the capture devices are the cameras and the microphones and the heat sensors and the motion sensors and all the rest of that are just becoming so low cost and so ubiquitous. Your fast pass in your car and
hasn't everything we've said here been fact-checked in Wikipedia already? There's no distance between...
Well, now you're putting GPS in every cell phone, and you don't go anywhere. You leave your wallet before you leave your cell phone at home these days. So it
all becomes part of the public space very, very quickly now.
A lot of cities are installing video cameras in all public places to reduce crime, basically.
I sense a new business, skiffs. For those of you who know in the federal business, they have skiffs, which are totally like electronic proof kinds of environments, so you actually probably can rent motel skiff.
The cone of silence.
I want a piece of it, and Vinod, you go for that one.
Well, and Bill, you have to tell your father, yesterday Google Earth put up the Macintosh version.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, okay. So there's a Mac version of Google Earth now. You can download it, which
my
allows
My problem with helping him, by the way, is he has his own names for everything on the screen that I think he shares with no one else on the planet. So I don't know. I can't have a conversation with him about what he sees.
No, there's another fundamental, aside from government, the government regulation, the E911 regulation, forces any phone company that in the United States, they must, according to the law, report your location within 50 meters to the police from the fire. That's the law. Now, it's not implemented as well, but that's the law. The regulatory regime initiatives will take a political path, but every day someone's coming up with yet another one of these regulatory regimes. And because of the atmosphere for terrorism, the notion that it's the proper thing that everything we do, how can I protect you if I don't know where you are at all times? And if I don't know with whom you are at all times? The echelon question goes to traffic
That kind
analysis.
of protection we might not want.
So what actions can we take?
Now, this 9/11 rule you're referring to is not related to 9/11, the event. This is the 9/11 emergency
the name
call.
Of the, it's related. It's the requirement that all cell phone operators in the U.S. provide public safety with your location. If you dial 911,
well,
that's
if you're in an emergency and that's the only way you can communicate your location, you will benefit from that. But it also opens a lot of interesting business opportunities.
A friend of mine's 11-year-old son crashed into a tree on a snowboard and just called his mom with his cell phone, and then she called ski patrol and they went and got him. So it's a strange way of calling for help, to call home first and then to call back. But and they didn't know where he was. But he said, "I'm third tree down from the left," or whatever.
Well, we can find it. Well, sir.
Hi, I'm Dave Edstrom, 19-year Sun employee. I want to just thank you guys for starting Sun. And something that I thought was worth capturing, since I guess the concern is that you guys are all over 50 and going to croak soon or something. But seriously, one of the things that I think really stood the test of time is the phrase, the network is the computer. And I remember, Bill, I'm sure you don't remember, but we were having a dinner in Aspen in summer '98, and you told the story about how that phrase came about, which I thought was, and the rest of us at the table thought was fascinating. I was wondering if you could retell that. Thanks.
I'd like to hear it. Well, just tell me what he told you.
Well, actually, I credit John with coming up with. I hope I did then too, because I think John came up with it, and I think John, it was on a trip to China, wasn't it? That we where did
this is when we learned about the style. John Hennessy was just here at Stanford. People come in, they give a lecture, and they leave. At Tsinghua, you come in and you start at 8 in the morning, and they expect people to talk until 6 o'clock at night with a break for lunch. So after the 4th or 5th hour, you are scrambling to come up with something to say. and try to reduce the rules about building something to the smallest, simplest one-sentence statement. The network is the computer. The machine is the manual. That one never quite caught on, but the notion is that if an 80-year-old gets a box and turns it on, it should work. I do recall we used to get you guys to go take a Sun out of its box as a customer would receive it and try to make it work.
Yeah. So I got to tell another story about Bill Joy that just occurred to me. Bill used to go to Japan back in the 80s, and he was just absolutely revered. I mean, they would just, so Bill would give a chalk talk in a room with a big a whiteboard up here, and Bill would every now and then just nervously switch colors. And so he filled up a whole wall, and there were like a whole room full of Japanese engineers hanging on his every word and writing down everything he said. And so he ended up with this thing that looked like the rainbow. And on his way out, he just, for fun, said, "And the colors matter." They still haven't erased the board. It's the Rubik's Cube of Japan, and I'm convinced that's why they're no longer a threat in the computer industry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Yes, my name is Mark Lenhart. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and this is, I guess, is for Bill Joy and anyone else that has read Kurzweil's new book, The Singularity is Near. Speaking of Moore's Law and why the future may or may not need us, what do you think of his thesis?
Well, I blurbed his book, so I did read it. I think what I said in the back of the book was, it's worthy of some discussion. I don't agree with everything Ray says, but he's got a group of dedicated people who work with him, and he's got a lot of facts, and a lot of his curves about the progress of technology are very interesting and certainly as accurate as anyone else has. And I think out to 2020, I think we can stay with lithography probably somewhere near, or something else somewhere near what Ray says. But I mean, I don't completely agree with Vinod. There are physical limits to certain aspects of computation that we already know. There are certain things that are impossible even, and there are physical limits to other kinds of things. And we know there are limits to certain information things we can do in certain ways. So I'm not sure that the progress will be quite as linear on those graphs that Ray has out into the late 21st century as he thinks, if for no other reason, that the economics that justify the investment to keep us on those curves may not be there, let alone there may be some difficult things we don't quite figure out how to do. The progress over the last 30 years has just been so fast that I think to hope for it indefinitely would be foolish.
It's 8:35. Our contract is to go to 8:30. Let's take a vote. Shall we continue? All right. We already have a lot of yeses. Do we have any no's?
So let me just offer, it's not embarrassing for you all to get up and leave, to me or to you. So if you feel like you need to go for it.
Sir. Oh, I'm sorry, this side. Sir.
Yeah, hi. Maybe a question for Andy and Vinod. Everybody's talking about, having the entire music library on your phones, on your mobile phones, et cetera, connected to the network. What are the challenges in today's networks to be able to handle that? And can today's network technologies and, capabilities handle it?
So I do have one observation which actually differs from what Scott was saying earlier, which is people seem to want to own their music because they listen to the same kind of songs over and over and over. So music in that sense is very different than, say, video, because you don't tend to watch the same movie over and over and over.
Yeah, but at my house, Barney, over.
Except for Barney. But of all things, video actually lends itself much more to a streaming, one-time rental, whatever model, which is also in the interest of the content owner, than music, where people all along have, made copies on their cassettes or tapes, or now on their iPod. So there's a significant usage difference between how people enjoy music versus how they would, for example, enjoy movies or video. And from a networking standpoint, the bandwidth is actually there today. So it really came down to a business model of how content owners can make money off these services. And it was, believe for the longest time you can't make money on, offering music on the internet until Apple proved everybody wrong. And now everybody's, of course, trying to offer those kind of services.
So, Andy, what do you, so this is head-on with existing legal models of intellectual property. So what do you think the future of intellectual property?
The important thing about music is that, there always was a Home Recording Act and the CD was never encrypted. So in contrast, video was always encrypted, and you actually cannot make a legal copy of a DVD. So unless you want to break the law, there's no legal ways of doing that, whereas you're perfectly within the law to take your CD and record them on your Mac and then download them to your iPad.
I have two observations. One is I don't understand the economics of building the next generation networks to the home, because unless some major transformation occurs, because the people who are going to write the checks to build the network don't seem to be the people who make the money because the network's built. And so some structural realignment has to occur, so that why would I build a network so other people can get all the market cap? I don't see that. Second thing is I don't watch television, and I just am completely mystified by what just happened at the Consumer Electronics Show, that everyone cares about this interactive television and all this stuff that Gates and Intel were talking about, because young people seem to play video games, they surf the web on their computer, they listen to music on their iPod. I don't see them spending a whole lot of time on this traditional, watching it by appointment or delayed appointment like you have with a TiVo. It seems to me that entertainment's coming more and more. People watch movies in bed on a laptop computer. I see entertainment more and more being multimedia integrated on that smaller screen. So it seems to me that if they take TV and unbundle it, maybe no one will show up. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens, because it's the same kind of game we saw with 3G networks, where people in the end felt, I think, like they overpaid. And there may be an overinvestment going on here, because I think entertainment's going to probably come from a different place than people who are TV focused think it's coming from.
Scott, you'd mentioned there were 20-some million downloads a month of the Java environment, and in your announcement with Eric Schmidt with Google, this played a fundamental part of the announcement. The press in general said, oh, boring, you didn't reveal anything new. But to me, the notion that moving the Google access out through this volume of Java downloads was a big deal. But you were just at CES, you heard, Larry, you heard the discussion by Google. What do you think about the future of this technology?
Of which technology?
Well, of the entrance by Google into the provision of video on demand.
I think Google has it exactly right, that people don't want to buy software, they want to use it. People don't want to set up a server, they want to access the services. And people don't like, free is a good model. At some point, it may go, they pay you to go to their, and fundamentally, there's a distribution channel we have with 20 million plus Java runtimes going down to PC environments. That's a partnership that Google wanted to have with us, and we're helping distribute their toolbar to the Microsoft. It was harder for them to work a deal with Microsoft to download the Google toolbar than it was to work with us to download the toolbar. So we were a natural partner, and we had a very interesting channel. That kind of activity is going to continue. And again, this gets back to, if you open it up, if you share, if you make it free, you create very large channels that can be monetized in I shouldn't say non-traditional ways, because TV has been free forever. And it's an advertising model, or it's a distribution model.
Let's see, I guess. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Novak. I work at IDT, son admirer. While I was too young to see the musical Fab Four, I'm glad I'm still alive here to see you, the computing Fab Four. Question maybe primarily for Scott. You mentioned a couple of times intellectual property, but I wonder if any of you had any comments on reconciling the apparent differences between what you're mentioning, setting it free, open source, sharing it with everybody, and still, as you have an outstanding patent portfolio, able to protect your own implementation, and any comments you had on that?
Yeah, so without getting into the long, and in fact, I'd encourage you to meet Greg Papadopoulos here, who is our guru around open source licensing models, how they talk about and contemplate intellectual property, what protections there are, what indemnifications there are, and it's all a very complicated and not entirely tested environment about what does open source mean, and if I grab some code out over the network, am I free and safe from a troll? Am I free and safe from the company that actually owns the IP, even if they open source? And there's not simple and clear answers. We could literally spend we could do a full year of intellectual property case studies in business school trying to understand all the intricacies of this. But patents are very important to protect yourself when another company comes at you. So there's MAD, mutually assured destruction. So I'm not sure Microsoft wants to come at us because we could go back at them. It's a little more complicated when you get to trolls. And, you know, there are people who go out and buy patent and then go after them. You can't go back after them because there's no there. It's just a difficult situation. Sometimes corporations turn into trolls. We got nailed by a particular film company from Rochester, New York, for supposedly having job infringement. We had to pay a $90 million payment. I call it a loan, because that particular company is moving into the digital business big time, and they're going to step all over our IP. So that's why I call it a loan with a high interest rate. Unless we can work out something more amicable. But, you know, that's one of the reasons why. And by the way, if you are going to use open source code and embed it into your product or your OEM or whatever, you'd better be careful that somebody doesn't come after you for stepping on, because you're fundamentally, if you build that into your platform, you'd better have some sort of indemnification, some sort of protection from the supplier of the software, or be ready to go deal with the IP issues, because they ain't going to go away. And I don't think that some of the companies with lots of IP and large market caps are just going to roll over and go away and let you take their methods, their IP, their trade secrets, and just run with it. And you know, I think one of the more interesting departments in business is going to be the legal department at, say, a Google over the next, because you don't sue a Skid Row bum, you sue somebody who's got a lot of money. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch as these new startups come up without a lot of IP, who are using lots of intellectual property, whether it be advertising algorithms or bid-ask algorithms, all kinds of technology. And there's been a patent on just about everything on the planet that you can possibly think of. And anytime you go off and do a new startup, I mean, I think you guys in the venture world know that that's always one of the bigger. That was the first question we got asked by the venture capitalists when we took the Stanford University Network, hence Sun Workstation, idea forward to the venture capitalists, is they wanted to know that we had free and clear IP access from Stanford, so that Stanford wouldn't come back and want to hang a royalty on our product.
And thankfully, Stanford sent us a letter that said that was the case.
That was free and clear, and we've been very generous back to Stanford because of the way they treated us.
This is Sudeep Roy. I'm a lifetime Sun family member. This question is for Bill and Vinod. If you were running the company today, what would you do differently than what Scott's been doing?
I'll let Bill answer that one. You know, it's really hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes with a different set of circumstances that you don't deal. You know, most of what you do is a function of what you deal with day to day. It's very hard to sit outside and strategize. It's pretty easy doing Monday morning quarterbacking, but it's much harder when you're sort of trying to make real-time decisions. So it's an unfair question. Do you ask either me or Bill?
No, I didn't. I go in and I literally sit down with Vinod once every 90 to 180 days and say, what am I doing wrong? And he is not at all bashful. He's just being very, very nice. I don't get a chance to snag him as often.
I think over the 20 years we worked together, I think there were a number of times where I wanted to abandon an old idea before Scott did. So Scott's more tenacious. Sometimes he was right, sometimes he was wrong. But you know, when you're the CTO of a company, you can suggest a 90-degree turn. And I suggested one in 1995 to the board with Java and the web. And that was, Scott took it up immediately. There were other times I suggested making changes that
I fought
were...
the ECL one for a while, and it turned out to be we finally killed the ECL machine, and that was just huge.
We were trying to do a high-end machine in an old technology. Because I thought it was easier to build a machine in an old technology than to build parallel software, which was probably the right decision at the time. Then about a year or two later, I wanted us to do only multiprocessor desktops, which I think would have been a good thing to do sooner, but it's hard. Either you do all multiprocessor or nobody assumes it's there and you don't get any software for it. So,
I think it's fair to say.
But he was a steadying hand, but I would have canceled more of the older things sooner, but it may not have been the right thing for the business in the short to intermediate term. In the long term, it's an open question. It could have worked either way.
All three of these folks have an open door to come tell me what to do, all four of them. John's never bashful either. He does it by email because he doesn't want me to scream back at him. So.
Yes, Leon Timorovich, and I have a almost philosophical question about the role and place of inventors in this world, because inventors try to make this world simpler, easier, faster, but the work of an inventor is not that kind of easy, simple, fast thing. So creating the world that is different from what they do themselves, do they work themselves out of the system? Do they become loners? Do they cut, so to say, they change the society in the way that it becomes not their kind of society? And if it happens, can we do something with that?
Yeah, I accuse our engineers all the time of being the kind of engineers who go out and buy 10-speed bicycles and pay extra to have them unassembled. Because it's all about putting the bike together and changing. They run over nails just so that they can change the tire. And, so the innovative spirit versus what the user has always been the great tension. I know at Sun, and I know Bill was always trying to make things simpler. The person said, I'm sorry for the length of this letter. I didn't have enough time to make it short. It was really all about the innovative spirit. It's easy to put it together and get it to work, but then to make it simple, small. Andy is another one who drives that kind of simplicity.
It's very, very hard to make things simpler because transistors are getting really cheap and bytes of memory are really cheap. So the natural tendency of things is to get bigger and bigger and fill up the available memory and the available transistors. So it takes constant effort to make things simpler.
So what is the pathway for an inventor? Does the inventor call up Vinod and say, I've got a great idea, fund me? Well, your schedules are so busy.
Call me first, then you can call the venture capitalist.
They send email because we don't check our voicemail nearly as often.
All right. Yes, question?
Hi, I'm Shannon McEllier. I'm a Sun groupie and a partner. Just real quick, too, I've never had a television, well, not since 1972, and there are actually more households in the world with televisions than indoor plumbing. That's not what I want to say. We are talking about privacy and ubiquity and how there's no privacy anymore, but I thought that there's actually a good opportunity for Sun today to really talk more about how they secure the network and how you can secure the world today, because you build in security in everything you do, and yet if you look on a list of companies, you don't see Sun anywhere listed as a security company. And I think that that might be an opportunity that Sun could look at today. And there are also two huge Microsoft folks in the third row that they just left. They're very influential, Microsoft.
Were they feeling insecure?
I'm glad our partner is here. Thank you.
Well, this issue, take Shannon's question at the broadest level. Can we design systems that are secure from the bottom up, from the iron up? We don't have them today.
Why don't you talk about how you and James worked on the security model for Java? I think that was core.
Well, who are you securing the system from? I think, if I think about it, one of my great discoveries over Christmas was I found this scanner. This Fujitsu made this scanner. Has anyone seen it, the ScanSnap? that you stick a stack of pages in. It's the size of a loaf of bread. You stick it on your desk, and it scans pages through 15 sheets a minute, double-sided, into PDF, okay? So, I mean, you know, lawyers do this for years, but I can take all that information, all the paper files in my office, I can scan it in, almost at point of, I have one in my kitchen, so I can take the incoming bills and scan them and email them to people to tell them to deal with it or so, whatever, you know, or things I don't like. You know, the point is that then that information is then electronic on my notebook computer, which is, the disk is encrypted, right? So my briefcase is in the trunk of my car. But if you break into my car and steal my notebook computer, you haven't stolen anything that's not encrypted. So, I mean, there are ways to steal it. You break into the server room where the disks are, but, you know, that's a big advance to be able to have security because, you know, it's much more secure than, Scott, you say, your mailbox, where people can just take the paper. So I think, but, you know, you have to define the system parameters for security, and unless you define them, you can't solve the problem. But for me, that's a big advance, just getting rid of the paper that I can leave in the airport. You know, that's, how bad do you feel when you leave something confidential accidentally in, you know, the men's room or something?
Well, Whit Diffie's here, and Whit, when public key encryption was first invented, when Whit invented public key encryption, there was a thought that finally we had a mechanism, a tool that would allow everything on the network to be protected. But in reality, the emails you guys send each other aren't encrypted, probably.
But a lot of e-commerce is transacted with those mechanisms and works perfectly fine. So in fact, you know, I would say the internet is much more secure than people believe it is, where there's some perception it's not secure, but you can use those mechanisms and have perfectly secure kind of environments.
We should ask Whit.
Yeah.
But so in this explosion of network utility computing, the world where everyone is using the network as the foundation for everything that they do, are we completely vulnerable, somewhat vulnerable?
I think people confuse Microsoft viruses with, you know, a security problem, which they are, but that's not something we can solve.
Where did they go now that we need them?
Please, go to the third row.
Yes.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Steve Heller, and I work at Sun Microsystems. If any of you have a role model that's not sitting on stage, I was wondering if you could tell us who that is and why.
Well, let me give you at least a couple of examples that I've always looked to. To me, ever since I was 15 or 16, the founding of Intel was just sort of this great role model. And over the years, as you've gotten to know the company and look at what somebody like Andy Grove has done, it's sort of a very competitive, very aggressive company with sort of a very clear sense of values in the company. Great management, great style, great values, and a real commitment to what you believe in. At the other end, not on the other end on the value spectrum, but sort of a completely different kind of person is a guy like Steve Jobs, who passionately, religiously believes his own ideas. And no matter what anybody else says, he's going to push them through. And I believe that's fundamentally why he's been successful. He has religious belief in his ideas. Just because everybody says, hey, let's be compatible with the PC or whatever, he doesn't do it. He decides what he believes and follows it through with a passion. And I think that's another very different type of role model. Larry Ellison's had the same sort of religious belief system, and I think those are ingredients that are key to success. So,
well, beyond my co-founders here, I've always, the two people I've admired are John, who's moderating the panel, and another John Doerr, who I'm now getting a chance to work with. I said that publicly more than a decade ago, so as embarrassing as it may be to John.
So who's your role modeling?
Oh, it's Bill.
Off the piano.
I actually always was a big fan of Einstein because, you know, to me he represents this kind of person who could think so clearly without even doing the experiment that he was right almost all the time except for quantum stuff, but it was just amazing how consistent he could look at the world.
Scott, did you have?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, I don't really.
Well, on that note, before we came up here, Scott said the biggest technical advance in the last year that I think is important is your driver.
Yeah, ping driver.
Now, how much did it add to
15 yards. That's cool.